Mitchell grabbed her by the collar in front of everyone and dragged her to the center of the field. 368 soldiers watching. Nobody moved. He shoved her forward and turned to face the formation. "This," he said loud enough for all of them to hear, "is what happens when someone who has never seen real combat thinks she belongs on a deployment roster." He looked back at her. "Prove me wrong, Captain. Right here, right now, in front of everyone." Sophia straightened her collar, looked at him once, said nothing, and the man who had just humiliated her had absolutely no idea what he had just started. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere, you've already bled for stay with me until the end of this story. Subscribe to our channel, follow along, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started the way every high-stakes morning started at Fort Dawson Military Base, with people performing confidence they weren't entirely sure they had. 368 soldiers had been standing in formation for 40 minutes before Colonel Adrian Mitchell said a single word. That was by design. Mitchell believed that making people wait taught them discipline. What it actually taught them was that he needed them to feel small before he felt powerful. Most of the senior officers knew this. Most of them had learned not to say it out loud. The exercise was supposed to be a leadership evaluation, something that happened 4 times a year before major overseas deployments. The kind of demonstration where unit commanders showed the brass what their people were made of, and the brass nodded and signed paperwork, and everyone went home feeling appropriately validated. It was by military standards routine. But the moment Mitchell's eyes found Captain Sophia Reynolds standing at the far left of the third row, routine stopped being the word that applied. Sophia was 29 years old and had the kind of stillness that made certain people deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't rigid. She wasn't performing composure the way junior soldiers sometimes did when they knew they were being watched. She simply stood there, the way a lake stands, completely present, completely contained, not asking anyone to look at her, and not hiding from anyone who did. She held her clipboard against her side. Her uniform was pressed. Her eyes were straight ahead. To most soldiers at Fort Dawson, Sophia Reynolds was the intelligence officer, the woman who read satellite data and enemy movement reports and cross-referenced signals, intelligence with field observations, and produced analyses that saved lives without anyone in the field necessarily knowing whose analysis it was that had saved them. She was respected in the way that good plumbing is respected, acknowledged when someone thinks about it, mostly invisible when things are working, desperately missed when it stops. She was not in the language Colonel Mitchell used when he talked about soldiers, a fighter. And Mitchell, who had decided something the moment he saw her name on the personnel roster for the day's exercise, had spent the last 20 minutes figuring out how to make that point in front of everyone. He walked toward her with the particular kind of deliberateness that commanders use when they want everyone around them to understand that something significant is about to happen. The soldiers in the adjacent rows felt it. The shift in attention was physical, like a pressure change before a storm. "Captain Reynolds." His voice carried across the entire field. Sophia stepped forward from the formation with one clean step. "Sir." Mitchell looked at her for a moment, the way you look at something you've already decided isn't useful. "You're on the deployment roster for the Kharif operation." "Yes, sir." "Intelligence support attachment." "Correct, sir." He nodded slowly. Then he turned and addressed the broader formation. 368 soldiers standing on this field today. Most of them have seen combat. Most of them have been in situations where the difference between living and dying came down to seconds and instinct and the ability to fight through something that would break most people. He paused. "And then we have the intelligence support attachment." There was a laugh from somewhere in the formation. Brief. Nervous. The kind of laugh that appears when someone in authority makes a joke that isn't entirely a joke. Sophia did not react. Mitchell turned back to her. "Tell me something, Captain. When the bullets start moving, and your computer screens go dark, and the enemy is 30 meters away, and closing, what exactly is your plan?" The field was very quiet. Sophia looked at him steadily. "Sir, every successful mission requires integrated capabilities. Combat effectiveness isn't a single skill. It's a system. My role in that system is to make sure the people making kinetic decisions have the best possible information before those decisions have to be made." Mitchell smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to end. "A system," he repeated. "Yes, sir." "Beautiful." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Let me tell you what I think about systems, Captain. Systems are built by people who've never been in a position where the system failed. And the system always fails. Always. The only thing that doesn't fail is the person standing in front of the problem with enough training and enough will to survive it." He let that land. "So I'm going to ask you again. Not about your role in the system. About you. When everything breaks, and it will break, what do you actually bring to this deployment?" Sophia held his gaze for a moment that stretched past comfortable. "I bring the ability to see what's coming before anyone else does," she said. "And the discipline not to react before I understand what I'm seeing." Silence. Mitchell stared at her. Then he said very quietly, so that the soldiers closest to them could hear, but the ones farther back could only see his expression. "That sounds like someone who's never had to react at all." He stepped back and raised his voice again. "Sergeant Cole." From the opposite side of the field, Sergeant Marcus Cole stepped forward. Marcus Cole was the kind of soldier who made other soldiers feel better about their life choices simply by existing near them. 6'4". Built across the shoulders, in a way that suggested his uniform had been specially tailored, which it had. A hand-to-hand combat instructor with a record that the base commander occasionally mentioned during recruitment presentations. He had competed in inter-service combat competitions and won. He had been in 3 overseas engagements and returned from all of them without a single report of hesitation under fire. I was also. And this was a thing, the people who knew him well would tell you, a genuinely decent man who was currently very uncomfortable with what was being asked of him. He looked at Mitchell. "Sir, I want to see a ground combat evaluation. Captain Reynolds as the subject." Marcus looked at Sophia. Something moved across his face: recognition. Reluctance, the specific discomfort of a man being used as an instrument of someone else's cruelty. "Sir, with respect, a standard evaluation protocol would usually involve..." "This is not a standard evaluation, Sergeant. This is a demonstration. For the benefit of every soldier on this field who is about to deploy to an environment where their life may depend on the person next to them." He looked at Sophia. "Are you refusing, Captain?" Sophia looked at him. Then she looked at Marcus. Then she set her clipboard down on the ground beside her precisely without urgency, and said, "No, sir." The soldiers closest to the front began to shift. Not dramatically, not obviously. The kind of shift that happens in a crowd when something changes from uncomfortable to something else, something harder to name, closer to dread. Marcus walked toward the center of the field. His face had settled into something professional and unhappy. He stopped about 6 feet from Sophia. "Captain," he said, his voice low, meant for her. "I'm not going to make this worse than it has to be." Sophia looked at him. "Sergeant Cole, I know your record. I've read your evaluation files. You're good at your job and you're a decent person, and you didn't ask for this situation." Marcus blinked. "Neither did you," he said. "No," she agreed. "But here we are." She moved her right foot back slightly, adjusted her weight. Nothing dramatic. The kind of small, practiced adjustment that people who've spent years training their body make without thinking about it. Marcus noticed. He frowned. And then the exercise began. Marcus moved first the way Mitchell had instructed: forward pressure-controlled aggression, a testing grab toward her left shoulder that was designed to establish physical dominance without causing injury. It was the kind of movement that worked against almost anyone who wasn't specifically trained to counter it. And something happened. Sophia moved. Not away from him. Not backward. Not to the side in the obvious direction. She moved in slightly, and her left hand came up not to block, but to redirect, and her weight transferred in a way that used his forward momentum against him and Marcus, who had never been taken to the ground in a training exercise at Fort Dawson. Not once. Not by anyone found himself with his back on the field, and the morning sky above him, and approximately 400 years of confusion passing through his brain in the space of 2 seconds. The field was completely silent. Marcus lay there for a moment, not because he was hurt, but because he was genuinely processing what had happened. Then he started to get up. Sophia was already there, hand extended. He took it. He stood. He looked at her. He looked at his hand. He looked at her again. "Captain," he said carefully. "Yes." "Where did you train?" A pause. "A long time ago." "That wasn't—" He stopped, reconsidered. "That wasn't standard army combatives." "No," she said. "It wasn't." Marcus looked at Mitchell. Mitchell's expression had changed. Not dramatically. But the confidence was different. Still present. But repositioned the way. Furniture gets repositioned when you realize the room doesn't work the way you assumed it did. "Lucky application of basic technique," Mitchell said. Marcus turned to look at him. He said nothing. But something in his silence said something clearly enough that Mitchell felt the need to fill it. "Sergeant Cole, you weren't expecting that movement. In a real combat situation with proper preparation." "Sir." Marcus stopped him. "She redirected my momentum in approximately 0.3 seconds, with her left hand, while I was at full forward pressure." Mitchell stared at him. "Your point, Sergeant." Marcus looked at Sophia again. "I don't know what her point is," he said slowly. "But I'd like to understand it better." And that was the moment. The exact moment, the one that would later be described in a dozen different ways by a dozen different soldiers who were standing on that field when Colonel Adrian Mitchell made the decision that would change everything about how that day ended. He stepped forward. "Clear the center," he said. The soldiers around the evaluation space took a collective step back. Sophia looked at him. "Sir?" "I'm not asking, Captain." He removed his jacket, handed it to the nearest soldier, rolled the sleeves of his undershirt to the elbows. There was a murmur through the formation. Not disbelief, more like the particular noise a crowd makes when they realize the thing they're watching has escalated past the point they anticipated. Major Dana Voss, standing at the left edge of the formation, took a step toward the field and then stopped herself. She had seen Mitchell in this mode before. Intervention only made it worse. But her hands at her sides had closed into fists. Specialist Derek Huang, 22 years old on his first pre-deployment evaluation, leaned toward the soldier beside him and whispered, "Is he seriously about to—" The soldier beside him, Corporal Amara Jennings, who had been at Fort Dawson for 3 years and had watched Mitchell conduct evaluations before, whispered back, "Yes." "Against her. Against her." Huang looked at Sophia, and then he looked more carefully, because there was something about the way she was standing now that was different from how she had been standing 20 minutes ago when Mitchell first called her name. She was the same height, wearing the same uniform, holding no weapon, standing still. But she felt different. It was the kind of thing that's almost impossible to describe in language and completely unmistakable in person. The difference between a lake that's simply there and a lake that's preparing to do something water doesn't normally do. Mitchell advanced. His technique was textbook and aggressive. The application of physical size and combat experience in a direct forward line, because against most opponents, that was all it took, and the directness sent a message about confidence that was itself a combat tool. Sophia waited until he was 2 steps from her. Then she moved, not backward, not to the side. She moved in and to the left in a single coordinated motion that took her out of his direct line, while keeping her close enough to redirect the force he'd committed to, and her right hand found a specific point on his forearm that changed the architecture of his attack entirely, and the forward momentum he'd built became something working against him rather than for him. He went down, not roughly, not violently, with the particular controlled inevitability of a structure that's had its foundation quietly removed everything above it, still intact, arriving at the ground, because the ground was where physics determined it should go. 368 soldiers watched Colonel Adrian Mitchell sit on the field at Fort Dawson and look at the woman who'd put him there. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. Nobody made a sound. The silence was the sound of 368 people revising something fundamental about what they understood to be true. Sophia stood above him. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had done something because it needed to be done, and would now deal with the consequences of having done it the way adults deal with the results of necessary decisions they wish hadn't been necessary. She extended her hand. Mitchell looked at it for a long moment. The whole field was watching. Every soldier, every officer, every specialist and sergeant and corporal and private who had been standing in that formation since before the sun was fully over the eastern tree line, all of them watching a colonel decide what kind of man he was. He took her hand. She helped him to his feet. He stood, and she released his hand, and for the first time since he'd called her name that morning, Colonel Adrian Mitchell looked at Captain Sophia Reynolds the way you look at someone you have genuinely, completely, catastrophically failed to understand. "Captain," he said. His voice was different, still his voice, but something had been subtracted from it. "Sir," she answered. He didn't say anything else, neither did she. And the field stayed silent long enough that the birds in the tree line, having gone quiet during the confrontation, began to come back. Later, an hour later, when the evaluation had technically ended and the formation had been dismissed and soldiers were standing in small clusters across the base in the particular way that people stand when they've witnessed something they can't stop processing, Major Dana Voss found Marcus Cole leaning against the exterior wall of the equipment bay and staring at the middle distance. "Sergeant?" "Ma'am?" She leaned against the wall beside him. "You knew something," she said. "When she redirected you, you knew it wasn't what it looked like." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't trained at that level," he said. "But there are certain things you can do that work because the opponent doesn't know them. Random. Lucky, like Mitchell said. And there are certain things you can do that only work when the person doing them understands force and balance and timing at a level that takes years to develop." And what she did. "What she did was the second kind," he said. "Both times." Voss looked at the field in the distance. "She said she trained a long time ago." "Yeah," Marcus said. "And that's the part that bothers me. Because—" He turned and looked at her. "Because you don't forget how to do what she did. Not after a year, not after 5 years, not after 10. That kind of training doesn't fade. It becomes part of how you move." He paused. "Which means the question isn't where she learned it." Voss waited. "The question," Marcus said, "is what else she learned there, and why nobody here knew about it." On the far side of the base, in a small office at the end of a corridor that most people at Fort Dawson had never needed to visit, Captain Sophia Reynolds sat at her desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and stared at the wall. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. But behind her eyes, something was moving. The thing that moves when a door you kept closed for a long time has been opened not by your choice, and you're not sure yet whether what's on the other side of it is going to be possible to close again. She had not wanted this. She had come to Fort Dawson 18 months ago specifically because it was the kind of posting where she could do good work in the intelligence role and not be visible enough to trigger certain conversations that she wasn't ready to have. She'd spent years being invisible in a different way, the kind of invisible that involved being somewhere no one would think to look, doing things that would never appear in any report that anyone would be allowed to read. She had been very good at that kind of invisible. And then Mitchell had put her at the center of a field in front of 368 soldiers, and she'd had a choice that wasn't really a choice. Perform weakness badly enough that it looked real, which she couldn't do. Not against someone of Marcus Cole's caliber, because he would have felt the falseness of it immediately, or do what she actually knew how to do. She had done what she knew how to do, and now there would be questions. She picked up the cold coffee, set it down without drinking it. Questions she had been fielding in one form or another for the entirety of her adult life. There was a knock at the door. "Come in?" The door opened. Major Voss stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She didn't sit down. She stood near the door and looked at Sophia with the expression of a senior officer who has spent the last hour revising her understanding of a person she thought she already understood. "I need to understand what happened out there," Voss said. Sophia looked at her. "The colonel challenged me. I responded." That's not what I'm asking about. I know, Sophia said. Voss took a breath. Sergeant Cole told me what he observed. He's been doing hand-to-hand instruction for 8 years, and he said what you did to him was beyond anything in standard Army combatives. He said it was the kind of technique that requires years of dedicated training. Sophia said nothing. And then you put Mitchell down, Voss continued. Mitchell, who has 30 years in the Army and hands-on experience in 4 different theaters, and who I have personally watched, put 3 different soldiers on the ground in evaluation exercises in the past 2 years. She paused. Who are you, Captain Reynolds? The question sat in the space between them. Sophia looked at her for a long time. I'm exactly who my personnel file says I am, she said finally. Voss studied her. Then your personnel file is incomplete. A moment passed. I think, Sophia said carefully, that's something above my authorization level to confirm or deny. Voss stared at her. Then she nodded once slowly and said, General Whitmore is on base tomorrow. Sophia went very still. He specifically requested to include Fort Dawson in his inspection schedule. He put it on the calendar 3 weeks ago. She paused. Before today's exercise, the silence in the small office was a different quality of silence now. 3 weeks ago, Sophia said. 3 weeks ago. Sophia looked at the wall. All right, she said. Voss waited for something more. When nothing came, she nodded again, moved to the door, and then stopped with her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, she said, the soldiers on that field today, they're not looking at you the way they were this morning. I know, Sophia said. Is that a good thing or a bad thing in your experience? Sophia looked at the cold cup of coffee on her desk. That depends, she said, on what happens next. And Voss left her alone with the door she hadn't meant to open, and the question of what was standing on the other side of it waiting. The next morning, Fort Dawson woke up differently, not in any way that could be measured or reported or put in a formal memo. Nothing had changed in the schedule. Nothing had changed in the duty rosters or the deployment timelines or the organizational charts that governed 368 soldiers moving toward one of the most complicated overseas operations the base had staged in 4 years. Everything on paper was identical to what it had been the morning before. But the conversations were different. In the mess hall, at 0600 soldiers, who had never spoken to each other about anything beyond operational logistics, were speaking about Sophia Reynolds. Not loudly, not in the way people talk when they're trying to be heard, in the careful, lowered voice way that people talk when they've witnessed something that rearranged something inside them, and they're still figuring out what the rearranged version looks like. Specialist Derek Huang sat across from Corporal Amara Jennings and pushed scrambled eggs around his tray and said, I've been trying to figure out how she did it, the movement with Cole. I've been through 2 years of combatives training, and I cannot figure out the mechanics of what I saw. Amara Jennings, who had 3 years on him and a quieter way of processing things, said, maybe that's the point. What is? That you can't figure it out. That it looked impossible because it isn't something you can understand from watching it once. You understand it when you've done it 10,000 times. Huang thought about that. So she's been doing something for 10,000 hours that none of us knew about. At minimum, Amara said, while working as an intelligence analyst. While working as an intelligence analyst. They sat with that for a moment. I keep thinking about her face, Huang said. When she was standing over the colonel. She didn't look satisfied. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who did something they were hoping they wouldn't have to do. Amara looked at him. Yeah, she said. I noticed that too. 3 tables away. Sergeant. First Class Raymond Okafor was having a different version of the same conversation with Lieutenant Christine Park, who had been stationed at Fort Dawson for 7 months and had worked alongside Sophia Reynolds on 3 intelligence briefings and considered her a colleague and a professional she trusted. You work with her, Okafor said. Not a question. I do. Did you know? Christine looked into her coffee. I knew she was the best analyst I'd ever worked with. I knew her threat assessments were accurate at a rate that was genuinely unusual. I knew that she had a habit of identifying variables that nobody else in the room had considered, and that she was almost always right about them. But not this. But not this. Okafor leaned back. What does that tell you? Christine looked at him. It tells me that she was very deliberately presenting only the part of herself she wanted people to see. Which means she made that choice intentionally. Yes. Which means she had a reason for it. Christine said nothing, because the reason was the part she couldn't construct from the information she had. And the inability to construct it was bothering her in a specific professional way, the way it bothers an analyst when the data is clearly pointing somewhere she doesn't yet have the access level to follow. In his office on the second floor of the command building, Colonel Adrian Mitchell sat behind his desk and did not eat the breakfast that had been brought to him an hour earlier and was now cold. He had been sitting behind his desk since 05:30. He had not slept well. This was not unusual for him. He was a man who slept lightly and worked constantly and had structured his entire life around the idea that rest was something you did when the mission was complete, and the mission was never complete. But this morning, the sleeplessness felt different. It felt like the particular wakefulness that comes not from urgency, but from sitting with something you don't want to look at directly, and knowing that looking at it is the only thing that's going to help. He had replayed what happened on the field approximately 40 times since leaving it the previous afternoon. Not the physical mechanics of it, he understood those more or less now that he'd had time to break them down. She'd used his momentum. She'd identified his patterns and used them against him. That was real and specific and the product of genuine training, and he could see it clearly in retrospect, the way you can see the optical illusion once someone shows you what to look for. What he couldn't stop replaying was the moment after. Her hand extended. Her face, which had contained nothing that looked like victory. Her voice asking if he was all right. He had spent 30 years in the United States Army. He had defeated opponents in training exercises and in combat situations. He had been defeated rarely, and each time it had been by someone who wanted him to know they'd won the particular expression. The deliberate pause before extending the hand. The calculated performance of generosity that was really just dominance, wearing a different coat. Sophia Reynolds had not done any of that. She had helped him up, the way you help someone up, when they've stumbled on a step automatically without making it mean anything, because the helping up was simply the next right action. And she was a person who did the next right action without requiring acknowledgement for it. That bothered him more than anything else, because it meant she wasn't trying to beat him. She never had been. He had put her in a situation where her only two options were to be visibly defeated or to reveal something she'd been keeping private, and she'd chosen the revelation over the performance of weakness, not because she wanted to prove anything, but because she was not capable of performing weakness. She didn't feel in front of a man whose professional respect for Marcus Cole she didn't want to undermine by letting Cole look like he'd been taken down by someone with no training. She had protected Marcus Cole's dignity by revealing her own history. Mitchell sat with that. He sat with it for a long time. There was a knock at his door. Come. Major Voss entered. She had a folder. She set it on the desk in front of him without sitting down. Sir, you need to see this before General Whitmore arrives. He looked at the folder. What is it? It came from base intelligence this morning, regarding Captain Reynolds. He opened it. The first page was a standard personnel summary. Name, rank, age, assignment history. The kind of document you read in 40 seconds and think you understand. He turned to the second page and stopped. Voss watched his face change. It didn't change dramatically. Mitchell was a man who had learned over 30 years to keep his face from telling stories he wasn't ready to tell. But something shifted in the region around his eyes and the set of his jaw that communicated that the document in his hands was not what he had expected. He read in silence for 2 minutes. Then he set the folder on the desk and looked at Voss. Is this verified? Base intelligence confirmed it this morning. The classification level on the underlying records is above what they can access here, but the summary clearance was issued by the Pentagon, so yes, it's verified. Mitchell looked at the closed folder. She led a classified special operations unit. For 3 years, Voss said, before transitioning to the intelligence role. 3 years. Yes, sir. During which He stopped, picked up the folder, read a specific passage again, set it down. During which she completed 17 missions in environments classified as high risk or extreme risk. Correct. And she's 29. She turned 29 in March. Mitchell was quiet. So she started at 23, directly out of advanced training. The silence in the office was a specific kind of silence. The kind that appears when a person's internal architecture is being revised in real time, and the revision requires more processing capacity than conversation allows. Why is she here? Mitchell said. In an intelligence support role at Fort Dawson. After that. Voss looked at him. That's the part we don't have clearance to know, sir. He stared at the folder. 17 missions. Sir. And I put her in the middle of a field and told 368 soldiers she couldn't fight. Voss said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be either too much or not enough, and Voss was a person who understood the difference. Mitchell picked up the folder again and looked at the third page. Near the bottom in small print that had the slightly different quality of text that had been added later, appended to the document by someone at a level above the original author, was a single line. A call sign. 2 words. The Silent Raven. He set the folder down very carefully, the way you set down something that is more fragile than it appears. Voss. Sir? Have you ever heard that call sign? She looked at him steadily. No, sir. But I made some inquiries this morning after I received the file. I spoke with a contact at Special Operations Command who has been in the community for 15 years. And he's heard it. He said it 3 times and then said he wasn't going to say it again and asked me to tell him why I was asking. What did you tell him? I told him the person attached to it was currently assigned to my base. A pause. What did he say? He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Tell your people to be grateful." The folder sat between them on this desk. Mitchell looked at it for a long time. Where is she now? Her office, sir. She came in at 05:30. She's been working. Working. Running threat assessment integration for the Kharif deployment. The same thing she was doing yesterday morning before the exercise. Something moved across Mitchell's face. It wasn't guilt exactly. Or rather, it was guilt, but underneath the guilt was something more complicated. The recognition that his understanding of the world had contained a structural error, and that the error had been causing damage he hadn't been aware of because he'd been inside it. He stood up. I'm going to speak with her. Voss hesitated. Sir, General Whitmore arrives at 1400. If you... I know when Whitmore arrives, Major. He picked up his jacket. Some things shouldn't wait until 1400. Sophia heard the knock at her door and knew before she opened it that it was him. She didn't know how she knew. There was nothing distinctive about the knock. 2 firm raps, standard military courtesy, the same pattern that half a dozen people used when they stopped by her office in the course of a normal day. But she knew. Come in. He entered, stood just inside the doorway, looked at her with the expression of a man who has rehearsed a version of this moment several times and thrown all the versions out. Captain Reynolds. Sir? He closed the door. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands at his sides in the particular way that large, physically confident men stand when they're in a situation where the confidence is no longer operating the way they're accustomed to. I received a personnel file this morning, he said. Sophia looked at her screen. I expected you would, she said. It contained information that He stopped, started again. That I was not previously aware of. Yes, sir. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him then. Did you ask, sir? The question landed without hostility. It was a genuine question. The kind that doesn't make the person being asked feel attacked, but that does make them feel the specific discomfort of the correct answer. Mitchell was quiet. No, he said. I didn't ask. People rarely do, Sophia said. They look at what they can see, and they construct a complete picture from the incomplete data. It's a natural human thing. It's also in intelligence work one of the most dangerous things a person can do. He looked at her. I owe you an apology. You owe 368 soldiers an explanation, she said. Not harshly, just precisely. What you owe me is less important than what that moment taught them. He blinked. What do you mean? What did they learn yesterday, sir? Those soldiers who are deploying to Kharif. What did they take away from what happened on that field? He thought about it. They learned not to underestimate people, he said. That's one version. What's yours? She turned her chair slightly to face him more directly. They learned that their commander makes assessments based on incomplete information and is willing to use his authority to act on those assessments publicly in front of the entire unit before verifying whether the assessments are accurate. The words hit him like something physical. That's what they saw, sir. And in 8 weeks those soldiers are going to be in Kharif making life and death decisions based on incomplete information, and the question of whether they trust their chain of command's judgment will be a factor in how they make those decisions. She wasn't angry. She wasn't lecturing. She was delivering an intelligence assessment in precisely the same tone she used to deliver threat analyses, calm, specific, accurate, without editorial embellishment. Mitchell stood in the middle of the room and felt the full weight of what she was saying. Then what do I do? He said. It was not the question of a superior officer to a junior officer. It was the question of a man to a person he had just recognized for the first time as someone whose judgment he should have been consulting all along. Sophia looked at him. You tell them the truth, she said. You go back out there and you tell them what you should have said yesterday before it started. That evaluations are supposed to gather information, not confirm assumptions. That you made an assumption and it was wrong, and you're telling them because a commander who can't acknowledge a wrong assumption is a dangerous thing to follow into a combat environment. He stared at her. You're asking me to stand in front of my entire unit and say I was wrong. I'm not asking you anything, sir. You asked me what to do. I told you. A long moment. Would you respect a commander who did that? He said. Sophia looked at him steadily. I'd follow that commander anywhere, she said. When General Thomas Whitmore arrived at Fort Dawson at 1400, he did not behave the way generals typically behave when they arrive at a base for an inspection. He did not proceed directly to the command briefing. He did not accept the coffee that was offered. He did not perform the standard theater of authority that involves standing in rooms while people stand straighter. He asked instead to see Captain Sophia Reynolds. The request went through Voss, who received it, processed it, and walked to Sophia's office in approximately 90 seconds. The general is asking for you. Sophia looked up. All right. Before the command briefing. All right. He asked specifically, by name, before he'd spoken to anyone else on base. Sophia was quiet for a moment. How long has it been? Voss asked. The question was slightly out of protocol, but it was asked with genuine human curiosity and not with any intent to leverage whatever the answer was, and Sophia could feel the difference. Long enough, Sophia said, that I wasn't sure this moment would come. She stood, straightened her uniform, picked up nothing. Ma'am, Voss said. Sophia looked at her. I just want to say, before whatever happens next happens, that the work you've done here in the past 18 months has been the best intelligence support this unit has ever had. I know that because I've seen every assessment that's come out of this office, and I know what the baseline looked like before you arrived. Sophia looked at her for a moment. Thank you, Major. I don't know what Whitmore's visit means for your assignment here. Neither do I. But I want you to know that whatever it means, this unit will be worse without you. Sophia's face did something complicated and brief that Voss would later struggle to describe, but would remember precisely. That's the first time in 18 months, Sophia said quietly, that anyone here has said that. She walked past Voss and down the corridor toward whatever was waiting. General Thomas Whitmore was 61 years old, and had spent 38 of those years in positions that required him to make decisions that other people paid for with their lives. He had the face of a man who understood the weight of that, and had chosen to carry it rather than set it down. He was standing near the window when Sophia entered the room, and he turned and looked at her with the expression of a person who is seeing someone they've been thinking about for a long time. Captain Reynolds. General. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved to the table and sat, gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. "How are you?" he said. Not an official question, a real one. "I'm functional," she said. "I heard about yesterday." "I assumed you would." "The whole building heard about yesterday." He meant the Pentagon. "You took Mitchell down." "He challenged me, sir," I responded. "You always did," Whitmore said. And the way he said it carried weight that a casual observer might have missed, but that Sophia felt in the specific way you feel a reference to something that mattered. She looked at him. "Why are you here, sir?" He leaned back. "There's a situation developing in connection with the Kharif deployment, a specific intelligence gap that we've been unable to close using current assets. The gap is significant. Significant in a way that changes the risk profile for the entire operation." Sophia's expression didn't change. "The kind of gap," she said, "that requires someone who can read a situation from the inside, not from satellite data or signals intercepts." "Yes. Someone with operational experience in that specific region." "Yes." She was quiet. "How long has the gap existed?" she said. 8 months. "And it took 8 months to come here." Whitmore looked at her steadily. "We weren't sure you'd want to come back." Sophia looked at the table. Outside the room, down the corridor, in the command center, and the mess hall, and the barracks, 368 soldiers were preparing for a deployment that was about to become something different than any of them had been briefed to expect. They were cleaning equipment and reviewing maps and running the particular mental simulations that soldiers run when they're 8 weeks from leaving, and reality is sharpening into something they can almost touch. They were doing all of that with the image somewhere in the back of their minds of a woman who had stood in the middle of a field and done something that none of them had a complete explanation for yet. Who had helped the man who humiliated her to his feet without a word of resentment. Who had then walked back to her office and started working. In the command building. Sophia Reynolds sat across from a general she'd known for years and felt the question that had been sitting under every decision she'd made in the past 18 months begin to resolve. "What's the mission profile?" she said. Whitmore reached into his jacket and placed a single folded document on the table. She opened it. She read it. She read it again. She set it down with both hands flat on the table and looked at it for a moment. "Sir," she said, "I know. This isn't an intelligence support role." "No," he said. "It isn't." "This is what you were trained to do," Whitmore said. "Before Fort Dawson. Before the intelligence role. Before all of it." She looked at him. "And if I say no, then I get on a plane and we find another way, and you stay here and keep producing the best threat assessments this unit has seen in a decade, and we all live with the gap. And the soldiers deploying to Kharif live with it too," he said quietly. "Or don't." The words sat between them with the full weight of their implication. Outside the window, somewhere on the far edge of the base, a unit was running a formation drill. She could hear the cadence, distant but rhythmic, the sound of people moving together toward something. She looked at the document again. "I need 24 hours, she said. "You have it." She stood. He stood. They looked at each other across the table, the way two people look at each other when they both understand that this moment is a hinge, that what happens next depends on a decision that only one of them can make, and that the other has already made everything else as ready as they can. "Sophia," Whitmore said. She stopped. He rarely used her first name. In a 38-year career, he had learned that professional distance was something he needed to maintain with most people most of the time, because the alternative was a kind of attachment that made the hardest decisions impossible. But there were people with whom the distance had never fully worked. People whose specific combination of ability and integrity and cost had earned something from him that he didn't give easily. "Whatever you decide," he said yesterday on that field, the way you handled it, that was... He paused. "That was exactly who you've always been," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she walked out. The corridor was empty. She walked back toward her office alone, and the sound of her footsteps in the quiet hallway was the sound of someone moving toward a decision that she had been moving toward without fully admitting it since the morning Mitchell had called her name and 368 soldiers had turned to look at her, and she had felt underneath the discomfort and the unwanted visibility something else. Something she hadn't felt in 18 months. The feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not sleep that night. Not because she couldn't. Sophia Reynolds had learned in environments far more demanding than a quiet office at Fort Dawson how to sleep when sleep was available and function when it wasn't. She had slept in vehicle compartments and on concrete floors and in positions that her body would still remember decades later. She knew how to make herself go under even when her mind wanted to stay awake. She chose not to this time. She sat in her office with the lights low and the document Whitmore had given her on the desk in front of her, and she thought about everything she had spent 18 months trying not to think about. The last mission had ended in a way she had never discussed with anyone who hadn't been there. Not in any debrief, not in any evaluation. The official record contained a sanitized version: mission objectives met, personnel returned no critical asset losses. The words were accurate in the way that a photograph of a battlefield is accurate. It shows you what was there, but it cannot show you what it cost to stand in the middle of it. 3 of her people had been injured, one of them seriously. The mission had required decisions that she had made in seconds, in conditions that provided no clean options, using information that was incomplete, and a timeline that was brutal. She had made the decisions. They had been the right decisions. And she had come home afterward, and filed the report, and attended the debrief, and then walked into a building in Virginia and sat across from a personnel officer and said quietly, and without drama, that she needed a different role. The personnel officer had not pushed. People who worked in the places Sophia had worked learned not to push when someone said they needed a different role. They understood without requiring explanation that the alternative to honoring that request was a person who stayed in a role past the point where they could perform it safely, and that the consequences of that were always worse than the transition cost. So she had transitioned. Intelligence analysis. Fort Dawson. A posting that was important and real and used her actual skills and kept her close enough to the operational world that she didn't feel entirely removed from it, while being far enough from the specific edge she'd been living on that she could breathe without calculating angles. 18 months of breathing. And now, Whitmore was sitting across a table from her with a document that described a gap in the intelligence picture for an operation involving every soldier on this base. And the gap was the kind that cost lives if it stayed unfilled. And he was the only person she'd ever worked for who would have given her the 24 hours instead of the mission order. She picked up the document again at 0300. She read it more carefully this time. The intelligence GAP was specific. There was a network operating in the eastern sector of the Karif region, a logistics and communications network that had been partially mapped but not fully understood. Current analysis suggested it was being used to coordinate supply lines for hostile forces. But the pattern of movement didn't match the standard model for that kind of network. There were anomalies, timing inconsistencies, behavioral signals that didn't fit the profile of the actors they'd been attributed to. Someone else had looked at the same data and drawn the wrong conclusion. Sophia could see it from the summary alone. She could see the error in the reasoning. The place where the analyst had taken the first available explanation that fit most of the data and stopped looking for the explanation that fit all of it. It was the most common analytical mistake in the world, and it was almost never made maliciously. It was made because humans were pattern recognition machines who stopped recognizing patterns when they found one that worked well enough. It was made because the data was enormous and the timeline was urgent, and at some point you had to commit to an assessment and move. The error meant that the force going into Karif would be operating on a model of the environment that was partially correct and specifically wrong in ways that would only become apparent once they were inside it. She set the document down. She picked up a pen. She started writing. By 0530, she had 14 pages of analysis. Handwritten because she thought better with a pen, because the act of writing by hand forced a deliberateness that typing didn't require. She had identified the specific anomalies. She had constructed an alternative model for the network. She had assessed the risk differential between the current operational plan and a plan adjusted to account for her model. The risk differential was not small. She looked at the 14 pages. Then she picked up her phone and called Whitmore's aide. "Tell the general I'm ready," she said. There was a pause on the other end. "Captain, it's 0532. "I know what time it is," she said. "Tell him I'm ready." Another pause. "Yes, ma'am." She gathered the pages, put on her jacket, walked out. The corridors of Fort Dawson at 0530 had their own quality. The base was already moving. It always was because military installations don't fully sleep, but the specific corridors of the command building had a stillness at that hour that the rest of the day never recovered. She walked through it, thinking about the 368 soldiers who were somewhere on this base right now, sleeping or waking, or running their morning drills, and about what the document on her desk meant for each of them in 8 weeks. She had made her decision somewhere around 0400, though she hadn't formally acknowledged it to herself until she picked up the phone. The decision wasn't about the mission profile. It wasn't about what Whitmore had asked. It was about the 14 pages sitting in her hand, and the fact that she had written them without being asked, and the fact that she already knew what she was going to do with them. Whitmore was in the conference room when she arrived. He had not been sleeping either, or if he had, he'd assembled himself back into full composure so completely that it made no difference. He looked at her when she walked in. He looked at the pages in her hand. He said nothing. Waited. She put the pages on the table. "The analytical error is on page 3, she said. "The network isn't a standard hostile logistics operation. It's a proxy structure. Someone is using it on behalf of a third party that none of your current assessments have identified. The timing anomalies are the signature. They represent coordination across 2 different operational tempos, which means 2 different principles." Whitmore pulled the pages toward him. Read page 3. "Read it again." He looked up. "You wrote this morning?" "Yes." "In how long?" 4 hours. He looked at the page. "Sophia," he said. "I know," she said. "If you're right, and looking at this, I think you are the entire Eastern Sector risk model needs to be rebuilt before this deployment moves." "Yes." "Which means we need someone who can do that. Not from a desk at the Pentagon. From inside the operational picture." "Yes," she said. "I know what it means." He looked at her. "So you've decided." She had thought at some point in the night about the feeling she'd noticed the previous morning when she walked back to her office after Whitmore's visit. The feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd been trying to locate where that feeling came from, whether it was adrenaline or habit or something more honest than either of those things. She'd concluded somewhere around 0330 that it was simpler than she'd been making it. She was good at this, not just competent, not just trained. She was the kind of good that is rare enough that the people around her noticed it even when they didn't understand what they were noticing, which was why Mitchell had felt the need to challenge it, and why Whitmore had gotten on a plane, and why Marcus Cole had looked at her on that field with genuine confusion and asked where she had learned to do what she did. Being good at something that mattered was not a reason to stop doing it. It was the reason to continue. "Yes," she told Whitmore. "I've decided." He nodded. "There's one condition," she said. "Name it." "The soldiers from Fort Dawson, the 368 on the deployment roster, they stay in the loop on the corrected intelligence picture, not classified out of their own operational briefings. They get the real model." Whitmore looked at her. "That's not standard for this kind of insertion." "I know. It's my condition." He considered it for a moment. "Agreed," he said. "And Mitchell," she said. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "He comes to the briefing this morning, the full corrected briefing. He needs to understand what his soldiers are actually going into. That's his right as their commander regardless." "Then make sure he's in the room," she said. "He's the kind of man who changes when he has the full picture. He made wrong decisions with incomplete information. Give him the complete information and he'll make different decisions." Whitmore looked at her for a moment. "You're defending him." "I'm advocating for the best possible command environment for soldiers going into a dangerous operation," she said. "Mitchell is a capable combat commander. He just needed the correct data." Whitmore almost smiled. You know, most people after what he did to them on that field wouldn't be thinking about his best interests. I'm not thinking about his best interests, Sophia said. I'm thinking about the interests of the people under his command. At 0800, Colonel Adrian Mitchell received a summons to a command briefing. The message was from General Whitmore's office. It included a classification level he hadn't seen attached to a Fort Dawson briefing in 3 years. He walked into the conference room at 0800 precisely and found Whitmore Voss, Marcus Cole Lieutenant Christine Park, and Captain Sophia Reynolds already seated. He looked at Sophia. She met his eyes without hostility or satisfaction or any of the things he might have expected. He sat down. Whitmore stood. What I'm about to share with this room does not leave this room. The classification level on this material is what it is for operational security reasons, and I expect everyone present to honor that. He looked around the table. Yesterday at this base, Captain Reynolds was publicly challenged in a manner that was, whatever the intent, professionally inappropriate and based on an incomplete understanding of her background and capabilities. I'm not here to adjudicate that. I'm here because what happened yesterday accelerated a conversation I was already planning to have. He placed a document packet in front of each person at the table. Captain Reynolds served for 3 years in a classified special operations unit before transitioning to intelligence analysis. During that service, she completed 17 missions in extreme risk environments. Her record during that period is, without exaggeration, exceptional. Mitchell opened his packet, read the first page. His jaw tightened slightly and then released. She has spent the past 18 months at Fort Dawson producing intelligence assessments that have been used by 3 different operational units across 2 theaters. The quality of those assessments, according to peer review at the Pentagon level, has been in the top 2% of analytical output across the entire intelligence community. Christine Park looked at Sophia. Sophia was looking at the table. This morning, Captain Reynolds identified a critical error in the existing intelligence model for the Kharif deployment. An error that, uncorrected, would have placed every soldier on this deployment at significantly elevated risk in the eastern sector. Marcus Cole sat forward. "How significant?" he said. Whitmore looked at him. "The kind that doesn't show up until you're inside it," he said. "And by then it's too late to adjust." The room was quiet. Captain Reynolds will be presenting the corrected analysis. After that briefing, she will be transitioning to a new assignment connected to the Kharif operation, the specifics of which remain classified above the present clearance level. He paused. "I will say this. The operation is safer with her involved than without her, and the soldiers on this deployment owe her a debt that most of them will never know the specifics of. I want the people in this room to know, because the people in this room lead the people out there, and leaders need the full picture." He sat. Everyone looked at Sophia. She stood. She opened her own copy of the packet to page 3 and turned it so the people across from her could see the specific section she'd marked. "The network in the eastern sector has been assessed as a standard hostile logistics structure," she said. "That assessment is partially correct and specifically wrong in ways that matter." She walked them through it. 14 pages distilled into 40 minutes of precise, unambiguous explanation. She showed them the timing anomalies. She showed them the behavioral signature of a proxy structure. She showed them what the corrected model looked like and why it changed the risk picture in the eastern sector in ways that required 3 specific adjustments to the operational plan. She did it without ego, without performance, without looking at anyone except the material in front of her and the faces of the people she was trying to make sure understood it correctly. Mitchell watched her the entire time. He watched the way she moved through complex information with the ease of someone who had been living inside it for weeks and could see the shape of it completely, the way a sculptor sees the shape inside the stone before anyone else can. He watched the way she answered Christine Park's questions, which were sharp and specific, and the way she handled Marcus Cole's question about practical field implications, which required her to translate intelligence language into operational language without losing accuracy in either direction. He watched her, and he thought about the 30 years he had spent believing that the most important thing he could know about a person was how they performed under direct physical pressure. He thought about the 14 pages she had written between midnight and 05:30 that were about to change the operational plan for a deployment involving his soldiers. He thought about what she'd said to him in her office the previous morning. Tell them the truth. When the briefing ended and Whitmore began talking logistics, Mitchell stood. Everyone looked at him. He turned to Sophia. Captain Reynolds. Sir? He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked around the room at Voss, who was watching carefully at Marcus Cole, who had his arms folded, and was waiting at Christine Park, who had a pen in her hand and had stopped writing. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not a private one. Sophia held his gaze. Yesterday morning, I made an assessment in front of this unit's entire formation that was based on incomplete information, personal assumption, and the specific kind of arrogance that comes from confusing one type of strength for the only type that matters. His voice was steady. He'd had a military career's worth of practice at keeping his voice steady in rooms where it was hard to do so. But there was something underneath the steadiness that was real and visible to anyone paying attention. I was wrong, he said. And I was wrong publicly, which means the correction has to be public too. Nobody spoke. I want to be clear about what that means for this unit going forward. He looked at the people around him. Your assessment of a colleague is not complete until you know their actual history, their actual capability, what they've actually done and survived and carried, not the version you construct from what you can see. He looked back at Sophia. The woman I challenged on that field yesterday has done things in service of this country that most of us in this room will never be briefed on. She has been carrying a history that none of us knew about, and doing her job with a level of excellence that apparently warranted Pentagon-level review. And I put her at the center of a public demonstration designed to embarrass her. He stopped. I am sorry, he said. Specifically, without qualification. Sophia looked at him. The room was holding its breath. Sir, she said, what you just did in this room, that is the hardest thing a commander can do, and the most necessary. She paused. The soldiers on this deployment are lucky to have a commander capable of doing it. Whitmore at the head of the table said nothing. He looked at his hands. But if someone had looked at his face, at that moment, they would have seen something that in a person with fewer years of practiced composure would have been recognizable as emotion. Marcus Cole looked at Sophia, then at Mitchell. Then he uncrossed his arms, leaned forward and said, with respect to everyone in this room, can we talk about what we're actually going to do about the eastern sector? Because I have people who are going into that zone in 8 weeks, and I want to understand what we're looking at. The conversation that followed lasted 2.5 hours. It was the most productive operational planning conversation Fort Dawson had had in 3 years, according to Major Voss, who would later write in her evaluation that the shift in the room between the beginning of that meeting and the end of it was one of the most significant she had witnessed in her career. Not because of the intelligence correction, though that was critical, but because of what happened to the dynamic in the room when the people in it stopped operating on assumptions and started operating on verified information. When people know who is actually sitting across from them, the conversations change. The decisions change. The things they're willing to say out loud change. By the time the meeting ended, the Eastern Sector operational plan had been revised in 3 places. 2 of the revisions were Sophia's. One was Mitchell's, a field deployment adjustment that drew directly on his combat experience in the specific terrain type, and that Sophia, when he proposed it, immediately confirmed was consistent with her analysis. She said, "That's exactly right." He looked at her with an expression that was almost surprised. She said, "You've been in that terrain. You read it correctly. The adjustment works." He nodded slowly. And in that exchange brief, professional entirely focused on the task, something shifted between them. Not into friendship exactly. Not into the comfortable warmth of colleagues who've always understood each other. Into something more specific and perhaps more durable, the mutual recognition of 2 people who have completely different kinds of expertise and who are for the first time in a room where both kinds are being given equal weight. After the meeting, as people gathered their materials and the room began to empty, Marcus Cole walked to where Sophia was standing and waited until the others had moved away. "The mission Whitmore mentioned," he said quietly. "The one you're taking." "Yes. It's not a desk assignment. No. He looked at her. Is it the kind of thing where when it's over you come back? Sophia considered the question with the specific honesty she applied to questions that deserved it. The goal, she said, is always to come back. Marcus held her gaze for a moment. Then I'll say what I should have said on that field before all of it started, he said. I've been in this job for 8 years. I've trained with some exceptional people. What you did in approximately 4 seconds on that field, I've been thinking about the mechanics of it since it happened, and I still don't have a complete picture. The mechanics aren't complicated, she said. Then what is it? She thought about it. Attention, she said finally. Everything I've ever been able to do came down to paying attention to what was actually happening, instead of what I expected to happen. Most people fight the opponent they came in expecting to fight. I just watched you, watched what you were actually doing, and responded to that. Marcus was quiet. That sounds simple, he said. It is simple, she said. It's just not easy. He nodded. Then he extended his hand. She took it. Come back, he said. That's the plan, she said. She walked out of the conference room and down the corridor and into the particular quality of light that existed at Fort Dawson at mid-morning. Somewhere on the base a formation was running drills. She could hear the cadence. She had been hearing it in one form or another for 18 months. She stopped walking for a moment. She stood in the corridor and listened to the sound of soldiers moving together toward something, the specific rhythm that had been the background music of the most important years of her life. And she let herself feel what it felt like to be stepping back toward the edge she'd stepped away from. It felt like recognizing something she hadn't known she'd missed until it was in front of her again. It felt like coming home to a place that had never been entirely safe and had never pretended to be. She kept walking. She had work to do. More preparation than she could complete in the remaining time before Whitmore needed her answer, formalized. Personnel files to review. Tactical maps to reanalyze with the corrected network model. Equipment she would need, and would have to requisition through channels that would raise no flags, because Whitmore's aide had already processed the paperwork. She had, in other words, a mission. And Captain Sophia Reynolds, the woman who had been standing in the third row of a military formation 36 hours ago, holding a clipboard, being told she didn't belong, walked back into her office, sat down, and began. The paperwork moved fast when Whitmore wanted it to. By 6:00 that afternoon, 3 separate requisition requests had been processed, approved, and routed back to Sophia's desk without a single administrative hold. Equipment she hadn't asked for in 18 months, specific gear, specific communications tools, a particular type of encrypted documentation kit that was not standard intelligence analysis issue appeared outside her office door before dinner. Whoever Whitmore's logistics coordinator was, they were efficient in the way that people are efficient when they've been told that someone important has said the word urgent. Sophia processed each item, checked it against a list she had written from memory because the list existed in no document and never would. She noted 2 items that were wrong, not dangerously wrong, just incorrectly specified, the kind of error that happens when someone is pulling from a standard kit rather than a tailored one, and sent a correction request back through channels with precise substitution codes. She got the corrections within an hour. She was sitting at her desk, reviewing tactical maps with her corrected network model overlaid on them, when Mitchell knocked on her open door at 17:30. She looked up. How was in his regular uniform. No jacket. The version of Mitchell that existed at the end of a day when the official performance of command had been set aside, and what remained was just the man. He looked tired. Not the operational tiredness of someone who had worked hard, the specific exhaustion of someone who had spent an entire day carrying something heavy inside a room where no one could see them carry it. "Sir," she said. "I'm not here officially," he said. I wanted to talk, if you have a few minutes." She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. He sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Mitchell looked at his hands. Sophia waited with the patience of someone who had learned that some conversations needed to find their own beginning. "I spoke to the formation this afternoon," he said. She looked at him. "After the command briefing, I called a full assembly, everyone who was there yesterday." She had not known he was going to do this. "What did you say?" she asked. He looked at the wall. "I told them what I should have said before any of it happened, that a leader's job is to see his people clearly, not to project what he expects onto them, not to use them to confirm a belief he already had." He paused. "I told them I had done exactly that the morning before in front of all of them, and I told them it was wrong." How did they respond? He almost smiled. Not entirely. 368 soldiers standing in formation, he said. You know what a group of soldiers looks like when they're surprised, when they didn't expect the thing that just happened to them. There's a specific kind of stillness. "I know that stillness," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I think you do." He was quiet for a moment. "Sergeant Cole started it," he said. "After I finished. He didn't say anything. He just started clapping. Once, slow, and then a few others, and then it became the whole formation." Sophia looked at him. "They weren't clapping for me," Mitchell said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. They were clapping for I think they were clapping for the idea of it. That a commander could stand in front of his unit and say he was wrong and mean it." He looked at her. "I've been in the army for 30 years and I have never done that before. Not in front of a full formation. Not publicly." "I know," she said. "How do you know?" "Because if you had done it before," she said, "yesterday wouldn't have happened." He absorbed that. "No," he said. "It wouldn't have." He leaned back. The chair was slightly too small for him, and he sat in it the way large men sit in chairs that are slightly too small, with the particular accommodation of someone who has made peace with the fact that the world is not always built to his dimensions. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "When I came to your office yesterday morning and apologized before the command briefing, you told me to stand in front of the formation and tell them the truth." "Yes. Did you know I would do it?" She considered the question honestly. "I thought you might," she said. "I wasn't certain." "What made you think I might?" She looked at him. "The way you took my hand," she said. "On the field, after I put you down. Most people in that situation, a person of that rank in front of that many witnesses, most people would have gotten up without the hand, refused it, used the refusal as a recovery of dignity." He was very still. "You took it," she said. "That told me something about what kind of man you actually are when the performance stops." Mitchell looked at her for a long moment. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about all the people I've evaluated over 30 years. All the soldiers, the officers, the personnel I've had under my command. How many of them I looked at the way I looked at you on that field?" "Probably some. Probably more than some," he said. "And the difference is that most of them I never found out about. They didn't have a General Whitmore who showed up with a classified file. They didn't have a skill set that forced the issue." He stopped. "They just absorbed it and did their jobs, and I never knew what I missed." Sophia looked at him. "That is the most important thing you've said since yesterday morning," she said. "I know." "What are you going to do with it?" He thought about it. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know I can't unknow it." She nodded. "Good," she said. "That's where change starts, with what you can't unknow." He stood. He looked at the equipment laid out along the side of the office, the gear that had arrived that afternoon, the specifics of which he clearly recognized, even if the official briefing on her assignment was above his clearance level. "When do you leave?" he said. 48 hours. He nodded once. "Then I should let you work." He moved toward the door and then stopped. "Reynolds." "Sir." He looked at her. "The analysis this morning, the Eastern Sector correction. Do you understand what that briefing means for the people on this deployment?" "Yes," she said. "That's why I did it." "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say as the commanding officer of those people." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Thank you." She looked at him. "Bring them home," she said. He held her gaze. "That's always the mission," he said, and he left. The 48 hours that followed were the most concentrated work period Sophia had experienced since the last operational assignment she was actively trying not to think about. She worked in 16-hour sessions with 4-hour breaks running the corrected intelligence model through every applicable scenario she could construct for the eastern sector. She was looking for holes, places where her own analysis might be wrong. Places where the proxy network model she'd identified might not account for something she hadn't seen yet. She found two. Both were minor. Both were addressable. She documented them, noted the uncertainty levels, and built them into the analytical framework with appropriate caveats. This was the part of intelligence work that people outside the community almost never understood: the active, relentless effort to find and document your own errors. The best analysts were not the ones who were always right. They were the ones who caught their own mistakes before the mistakes caught someone else. Christine Park came by the office on the second morning. She didn't knock. The door was open, and she walked in and set a coffee on the corner of the desk and sat in the chair without being invited. Sophia looked at her. "You're leaving in a day," Christine said. "Yes. And whatever you're leaving for, we're not cleared to know the details." "Correct." Christine looked at the maps spread across Sophia's desk. Her eyes moved across them the way an analyst's eyes move, finding structure, looking for the thing that organizes everything else. "The corrected model," she said. "I've been working with it since the briefing. The proxy network identification. How long did you know?" Sophia looked at her. "I suspected it within the first 3 weeks I was reading Karif Intelligence," she said. "I didn't have enough data to make the formal case until 6 months ago." Christine stared at her. 6 months. "Yes. And you didn't?" "I submitted a supplementary analysis flagging the anomalies through standard channels 14 weeks ago," Sophia said. "It was reviewed and classified as inconclusive. The primary analyst at the time determined the anomalies were within acceptable variance." Christine was very still. "I never saw that submission," she said. "No," Sophia said. "You wouldn't have. It was filtered at the review stage." "Filtered by whom?" "Someone who had already committed to the existing model and interpreted the anomaly flag as noise rather than signal." She paused. "It happens. It happens more than it should, and less than people who've never worked in intelligence believe." Christine looked at her. "If that analysis hadn't been filtered, if it had moved through correctly, we would have had the corrected model 4 months ago," Sophia said. "And yesterday's briefing would have happened at a less compressed timeline and with more time to adjust the operational plan. But instead we have the timeline we have, which is workable." She looked at Christine. "It's always workable until it isn't. The job is to make sure it stays in the workable category." Christine looked at the maps. "I want to do what you do," she said, "not as a compliment, as a statement of direction." Sophia looked at her. "You already do." "Not at your level." "My level took 10 years, Sophia said. "And most of those years, I was making mistakes I only understood later. Some of them I'm still understanding." "What was the biggest one?" Sophia considered the question. "Believing," she said finally, "that the best way to protect the people I worked with was to carry more of the weight myself. Take on more. Extend my own capacity past its real limit. Because I was good at it and I trusted my judgment more than I trusted anyone else's." Christine listened. "What happened?" "Eventually I was wrong," Sophia said. "Not catastrophically, but wrong enough that people I was responsible for paid part of the cost of my error. And the error came directly from the fact that I had stopped checking my own judgment against anyone else's, because I had been right so many times that I had started confusing being reliably right with being incapable of being wrong." The room was quiet. "Is that why you came here?" Christine said carefully. "Fort Dawson, the intelligence role." Sophia looked at the maps. "Partly," she said. "And now you're going back." "Different," Sophia said. "I'm going back differently." "What does that mean?" "It means I know things now that I didn't know before the last assignment ended, about what I can carry and what I need to put down, about when my judgment needs to be checked against someone else's." She paused. "About when to ask for the hand." Christine looked at her. "On the field," she said slowly. "When Mitchell came at you, you could have hurt him. More than you did. He was fully committed to that forward pressure. If you'd wanted to make a point—" "That was never the point," Sophia said. "I know. I'm saying you didn't. You put him down, and you offered your hand, and when he took it, you let it mean exactly as much as it needed to, and no more. Christine looked at her. That was a choice that required a specific kind of discipline, the kind that's harder than the physical part. Sophia was quiet for a moment. The physical part is the easy part, she said. The hard part is knowing what you're doing and why and stopping at the right place. Christine nodded. She picked up her coffee and stood. I'm going to be in the Eastern Sector support role for this deployment, she said, working with the corrected model. I know, Sophia said. I requested you specifically. Christine looked at her. You? Whitmore asked me for a recommendation on who should carry the analytical lead from this end during the operation. You were my recommendation. Christine stood in the middle of the office holding her coffee and feeling the particular disorientation of learning that someone you admire has been moving pieces in your direction while you weren't watching. Why? She said. Because you asked me the right questions, Sophia said. And because you came in here this morning without being invited and sat down and said what you actually wanted to say. And those are both things that good intelligence analysts do instinctively and bad ones never figure out. Christine was quiet. Thank you, she said. Do good work, Sophia said. That's what it means. On the morning of Sophia's departure, Fort Dawson did something it rarely did for personnel transitions. It noticed. The word had moved through the formation, not officially, not through any chain of command, communication, but through the specific channels that military units develop for passing information that matters to them personally rather than operationally. Soldiers talk. Not always about the things they're supposed to talk about. Sometimes about the things that hit them in a real place and that they need to process by saying them out loud to someone who was also there. The thing that had hit them was simple and enormous simultaneously. They had watched a woman be publicly dismissed. They had watched her respond to that dismissal by demonstrating without drama or announcement that the dismissal had been based on a fundamental misreading of who she was. And then they had watched her spend the next 48 hours saving the lives of people who hadn't even known their lives needed saving. Specialist Derek Huang was in the corridor outside the intelligence offices at 0615 when Sophia came out carrying her bag. He was not technically supposed to be there at that hour. He was supposed to be at morning PT, but he had arranged to be there because he had spent 2 days thinking about something and had decided that there was one thing he wanted to say before the opportunity was gone. He straightened when he saw her. She stopped. Specialist. Ma'am. He held himself at attention and then seemed to decide that was not quite what he wanted and relaxed into something more direct. I was on the field 2 days ago, 3rd row. I know, she said. I saw you. He blinked. You were watching the formation. I always watch the formation, she said. It's what intelligence officers do. He almost smiled. I wanted to say something, before you go. She waited. I've been in the Army for 2 years, he said. And there's this thing they tell you in training that leadership is recognizing what people are actually capable of and using that capability correctly. And every senior person I've met since then has said some version of that, and I've always nodded along because it sounded right. He paused. I'd never actually seen it until 3 days ago, until the colonel stood in front of the formation and said what he said. And I understood that what he was doing, learning to see someone correctly, even when it cost him something that was the actual thing, the real version of what they'd been describing. Sophia looked at him. And you, he continued, the way you handled all of it, the field, the briefing, everything after that was, I don't have the right word for it. You don't need one, she said. I wanted you to know, he said, that it mattered. To me, specifically. Not just as something that happened on a field, as something I'm going to carry. She looked at him for a moment. Specialist Huang. Ma'am? Pay attention to the people around you, she said. Not to what you expect them to be, to what they actually are. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. That will keep you alive more reliably than almost anything else. He held her gaze. Yes, ma'am. She walked past him. He watched her go. Mitchell was standing near the vehicle bay when she came through. He was holding a coffee cup with both hands, and he looked like a man who had been standing in one place for a while, which he'd been there for 20 minutes, having told himself he was checking on a logistics issue, and knowing with the self-awareness he'd been developing at an accelerated rate over the past 48 hours that he was not. She saw him. He straightened. She stopped. "Sir?" "Reynolds." He looked at the bag. "You travel light." "Always have." He nodded. They stood for a moment in the particular kind of silence that two people share when they've said the important things, and what remains is the acknowledgement that the important things were said. "The Eastern Sector Plan," he said. "The 3 adjustments from the briefing. I've already started working them into the operational sequence." "Good," she said. "The 3rd one, the timing offset on the first entry. I want to make it larger than you specified. Add another 40 minutes. She looked at him. "Walk me through your reasoning." He did. It was specific, grounded in terrain experience she didn't have and hadn't been able to model, and it was correct. She saw it immediately. "Agreed," she said. "Make it 90 minutes, not 40. That covers both the timing anomaly and the secondary communication window." He looked at her. "You just increased my adjustment." "You were right about the direction," she said. "I know the network behavior. You know the terrain. Together you get 90 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. "This is what it looks like," he said. "Isn't it? When it works." She knew what he meant. "Yes," she said. "This is what it looks like when it works." He extended his hand. She took it. His grip was what it always was, firm, direct, unambiguous. But the person behind it was different from the person who had stood on a training field 2 days ago and believed that what he was about to do was a reasonable thing to do. "Come back," he said. The same words Marcus Cole had used. "That's the plan," she said. The same answer. She walked to the vehicle. She put her bag in. Got in. The driver, a specialist, she didn't know, someone from Whitmore's detail, said nothing beyond confirming the destination and pulling forward. She did not look back. Not because she didn't want to, because she was already thinking about what was ahead. The mission profile. The Eastern Sector. The proxy network that no one had correctly identified until 2 nights ago, when she sat in a low-lit office and wrote 14 pages from a place inside herself that had never stopped working, even when she asked it to rest. The base moved past the windows of the vehicle. She thought about 368 soldiers. She thought about Christine Park, running the corrected model from this end. She thought about Marcus Cole, who had been taken to the ground by her redirect and gotten up and asked the right question. She thought about Mitchell standing in front of a full formation and saying I was wrong and meaning every word. She thought about Derek Huang in a corridor at 0615 saying, "I'm going to carry this." And she thought about herself at 23, young and certain, and already carrying things that most people her age would never be asked to carry. And she thought about the person that 23-year-old had become in the years since. Not harder, not more closed, not more armored against the world in the way that people sometimes become armored when the world has repeatedly demonstrated that it is capable of being very heavy. Different, wiser about weight, wiser about when to put it down, wiser about whose hands could share the load and how to tell the difference between the people who could carry and the people who only thought they could. The base gate passed. The road opened. Somewhere ahead of her, there was a gap in the intelligence picture that was costing lives she hadn't counted yet. She was going to close it. That was the mission. That was always the mission. She settled into the seat and let Fort Dawson fall away behind her, carrying everything it had given her in the past 48 hours, which was, she thought, more than the previous 18 months combined, and turned her attention completely to what was in front of her. The driver said nothing. The road said nothing. And Sophia Reynolds, who had been standing in a formation 2 days ago holding a clipboard and being told she didn't belong, rode toward the thing she was built to do. The Eastern Sector smelled like dust and old decisions. That was the first thing Sophia registered when she arrived at the forward operating base that Whitmore's team had established 40 kilometers from the edge of the proxy network's primary operational zone. Not a smell she could describe to someone who hadn't been in places like this. It was the particular quality of air in a location where a lot of people had been making high-stakes choices for a long time, and the weight of those choices had somehow settled into the ground itself. She had been in places like this before. She recognized the feeling the way you recognize a language you once spoke fluently and then stepped away from, not with comfort exactly, but with the specific ease of a person who knows the grammar. The forward base was small and efficient. Whitmore's people were good. They had set up the intelligence coordination hub in the most defensible interior room and had run the communications array in a pattern that minimized signal exposure and maximized redundancy. She noted these things automatically the way she noted everything and filed them in the part of her mind that was already building a complete operational picture. Captain James Reyes met her at the entrance. He was 34, former Ranger currently attached to the intelligence fusion cell that Whitmore had assembled specifically for this operation. He had a compact, careful manner that told her immediately he was the kind of person who thought before he spoke and meant what he said when he did. "Captain Reynolds," he said. "Captain Reyes." He looked at her for a moment, the particular look that people give when they've heard about someone before meeting them and are assessing whether the person matches the description. "The General briefed us on your corrected model," he said. "We've been working with it for 36 hours. What did you find?" "Two things you didn't flag, and one thing that confirms your proxy identification more precisely than your original analysis." She looked at him. "Walk me through it," she said. "Now you just arrived." "Now," she said. He almost smiled. "This way," he said. The confirmation came from signal timing data that Reyes's team had collected in the 36 hours before Sophia arrived. It was subtle, a 0.3-second offset in the communication rhythms between two nodes of the network that shouldn't have existed if both nodes were operating under a single command structure. The offset was consistent, regular. It was the signature of two different operators using two different protocols because they'd been trained by two different organizations. Sophia stared at the data for 4 minutes without speaking. Reyes waited. "The second principle," she said. "It's not regional." "No," he said. "This is an outside actor, someone running a proxy inside a proxy." "That's what the offset suggests," he said. She looked at him. "How long did it take you to identify this?" 22 hours, he said. "I was staring at the timing data, and I couldn't reconcile the offset with any standard operational model for actors in this region. And then I remembered something from a briefing about a network structure that was used in..." He named a location that was in Sophia's classified file. A place she had been years ago doing work that had never appeared in any accessible report. She went very still. "You worked the analysis for that network," he said carefully. "I've read the unclassified portions of the case study. The offset signature was the same." She looked at the data again. "Who else knows about this?" "In this room, 3 people including you. I kept it tight until I could confirm it." "Smart," she said. "Is it the same actor?" She looked at the offset numbers, the specific interval, the regularity of it. "I don't know yet," she said. "But the methodology is consistent. Someone taught both networks the same timing protocol." She paused. "Which means either it's the same trainer or it's the same organization." Reyes absorbed this. "If it's the same organization, then the Eastern sector isn't just a logistics problem," she said. "It's the edge of something significantly larger." The room was very quiet. "The Kharif deployment moves in 6 weeks, Reyes said. "I know. If we go in without fully understanding what we're looking at..." "I know," she said again. Her voice was steady, completely steady. The voice of a person who has stood at the edge of complicated problems before and understands that panic is the first thing you have to eliminate before you can think clearly enough to be useful. "Which is why we're going to spend the next 72 hours building the complete picture. And then we're going to give Mitchell and his people exactly what they need before they cross that line." Reyes looked at her. 72 hours, he said. "Can your team work a 72-hour analytical sprint?" "I have 4 analysts who haven't slept properly in 2 weeks, he said. "They will work a 72-hour analytical sprint because you are here, and they have been wanting to ask you questions since the moment the general mentioned your name." She looked at him. "Tell them to start with the offset data," she said. "I want every instance of that specific timing pattern in everything we've collected from this network for the past 8 months. Every single one. Cross-referenced with the signal strength data to build a geographic map of where the protocol is being used. That's going to take... How many analysts do you have?" 4. "Split them. 2 on the offset pattern, 2 on the geographic cross-reference. I'll work the synthesis." He nodded once. "One more thing," she said. "Ma'am. The 2 things you found that I didn't flag. You said 2 things." He paused. "I was going to get to those." "Get to them now." He looked at the data spread. The first one is a personnel movement pattern in the northern edge of the network. 3 individuals moving on a rotation cycle that doesn't fit the logistics model. They're not moving supplies. They're moving themselves. Regularly. On a schedule. "Couriers," she said immediately. "That's what I thought. But the rotation is too frequent for standard courier work. They're moving every 4 days." She thought about it. "They're not carrying information out," she said. "They're carrying instructions in. Someone is running active command and control of this network from outside the region on a 4-day update cycle." Reyes stared at her. "I had not gotten to that conclusion," he said. "It's the only model that fits the rotation frequency," she said. "What's the second thing?" He was quiet for a moment. He pulled a separate document from the stack beside him and put it on the table in front of her. She looked at it. It was a personnel identification, fragmentary, assembled from several partial sources, cross-referenced against 3 different databases. The image was low resolution, and the biographical information was incomplete. But the name attached to it was not incomplete. The name was clear. She looked at it for a long time. "Where did you get this?" she said. Her voice was exactly the same, steady, measured. But something had shifted in the room. Reyes felt it the way you feel a change in atmospheric pressure. "Cross-referencing the courier rotation against known actors in the region," he said carefully. His name came up in a signals intercept from 3 weeks ago, partial, first name only, but matched against the physical description from the courier movement pattern. "It's him," she said. "You know him." She looked at the photograph for another moment. "I know his methodology," she said. "I've been reading his signature for 3 years without knowing whose it was." Reyes waited. "The network in the previous location," she said. "The timing protocol, the courier system, the proxy inside a proxy." She looked up from the photograph. "All of it came from the same person. I documented the methodology without ever being able to identify the source. And he's been operating in this region for..." She looked at the dates on the document. "At least 14 months. That predates the Kharif operation planning by 6 months," she said. "He was already here before this deployment was a concept. He's not responding to us. We're operating in a space he prepared." Reyes sat down. It was the involuntary sitting down of a person whose legs have received information from their brain that requires a moment to be processed before forward motion is advisable. "If he knows the deployment is coming." "He does," she said. "He always knows. That's what he does. He doesn't react to operations. He positions before they begin, and then he waits." "What does he wait for?" She looked at the photograph one more time. "For the moment when the people who came in with an incomplete picture have to make a decision based on what they don't know," she said. "And then he uses the gap." She picked up the photograph and put it face down on the table. "We're not going to give him the gap," she said. She did not sleep for the first 40 hours. Reyes noticed this and said nothing about it for the first 36, which was the appropriate interval. At hour 37, he put a food tray on the corner of her workspace without comment and walked away. She ate it without looking up from the data. The picture that emerged from the 72-hour analytical sprint was the most complete intelligence model of the Eastern Sector network that anyone had produced in 14 months of effort. It was also in several critical respects alarming, in ways that Sophia had been managing carefully inside herself since Reyes put the photograph on the table. The individual in the photograph, she used his operational designation in her documentation, which was the professional practice, and also the practice of a person who has learned that certain names carry weight that interferes with clear thinking had built something more sophisticated than anyone at the operational planning level had been briefed to expect. The proxy network was not primarily a logistics structure. It was an information collection apparatus. It had been gathering data on the deployment planning, on personnel movements, on the specific operational adjustments that had been made in response to every intelligence assessment the coalition had produced in the past year, including the corrected assessment that Sophia had produced 2 days before leaving Fort Dawson. She went back through the signal intercepts, looking for any indication of when the network's collection posture had shifted, and found a change in the communication frequency between two specific nodes that had occurred 31 hours after her corrected model was submitted to Whitmore. 31 hours. She sat with that. Someone in the chain, between Whitmore's office and the operational planning level, had communicated not necessarily deliberately, not necessarily with malicious intent, possibly through nothing more than a changed decision that was visible to the right observer. Enough information for the network to know that the intelligence picture had shifted. She took the finding to Reyes at hour 41. He read it. He set it down. "There's a leak," he said. "There's a gap," she said. "Not necessarily a person. Could be a pattern. A behavioral change that was visible from the outside. Someone moved differently after the corrected model landed, and the network read that movement." "Can you identify who?" "I can narrow it," she said. "Give me 6 hours." It took 4. The behavioral pattern that had been visible to the network traced back to a logistics adjustment, a specific equipment requisition that had been modified after Sophia's corrected Eastern Sector model changed the risk profile for the deployment. The requisition had been processed through a standard channel that under normal circumstances was perfectly secure. But one of the processing nodes for that channel routed through a commercial communication system that the network had been monitoring, not a person, a process. A gap in the procedural architecture that had existed for months and that nobody had identified because it required knowing what the network was collecting in order to understand what the network could see. She documented it, flagged it, sent it to Whitmore directly with a recommendation to route all subsequent logistics modifications through the alternate channel immediately. Whitmore's response came back in 20 minutes. It said implemented. Good catch. 2 words that carried more weight than they appeared to. Reyes read the response over her shoulder. "Good catch," he repeated. "That's what he sent." "He's efficient," she said. "You identified a 14-month operational intelligence collection apparatus, traced a procedural leak, closed the gap, and confirmed the identity of the network's architect. In 72 hours. She looked at him. "We did that," she said. "Your team did the offset analysis. Without that, I'm still working a proxy identification without a name." He was quiet for a moment. "The analyst who ran the offset cross-reference," he said. "She's 26. First operational deployment. She's been in the intelligence community for 3 years, and she was working 18-hour days before you arrived because she knew something was wrong with the existing model, and she couldn't get anyone to take the anomaly seriously." Sophia looked at him. "What's her name?" "Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo." "Bring her in," Sophia said. Okonkwo was 26. And had the specific look of a person who has been running on a combination of certainty and caffeinated beverages for an extended period, and is not entirely sure whether the conversation she's been asked to have is going to go well or badly. She stood just inside the door of the coordination room, with her hands at her sides and her face carefully arranged into something professional that was slightly undermined by how clearly she was working to maintain it. "Lieutenant Okonkwo," Sophia said. "Ma'am. Captain Reyes tells me you identified the timing offset." "Yes, ma'am. I submitted the anomaly flag through standard channels 6 weeks ago, and it was assessed as within acceptable variance, so I—" She stopped. "You kept working it anyway," Sophia said. A pause. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Okonkwo looked at her. "Because it wasn't within acceptable variance," she said. "It was being assessed that way because the existing model didn't have a category for what it actually was. And I couldn't make the model accept the data without first being able to explain what the data meant, which I couldn't do without more data, so I kept collecting." Sophia looked at her for a long moment. "How many times did you resubmit?" 3, Okonkwo said. The third time I was told to focus on assigned analytical priorities. And you did. I did the assigned work, Okonkwo said. And I kept working the offset pattern on my own time. Your own time. Yes, ma'am. Sophia thought about a 23-year-old who had done something very similar in a different role, in a different location, and had been told in different words that the thing she was seeing probably wasn't what she thought it was, and had kept looking anyway, because the alternative was letting something important stay wrong. You found the thing that broke the case open, Sophia said. Without your offset analysis, the network architect's identity stays unconfirmed, and the deployment goes in without a complete picture. Okonkwo was very still. The people on this deployment owe you something they don't know they owe you yet, Sophia said. When this is done, and the classification comes off some of this, and it will parts of it make sure the offset analysis is documented with your name on it, not buried in a team report. Your name. Okonkwo looked at her. Her professional composure developed a small structural crack. Yes, ma'am, she said. Her voice was steady, but barely. One more thing, Sophia said. When they told you to focus on assigned priorities, when they assessed the anomaly as within acceptable variance, what did you do after that conversation? Okonkwo blinked. I went back to my desk, she said. And I wrote down exactly what I believed the data showed. All of it. With full documentation of my reasoning, kept it in a local file. Why? Because I wanted to know if I was right, Okonkwo said. And because if I was wrong, I wanted to understand where the error was. And because if I was right and something happened. She stopped. I didn't want the gap to stay a gap because I stopped looking at it. Sophia held her gaze. That, she said quietly, is exactly the right instinct. Don't let anyone train it out of you. Okonkwo left the room 10 minutes later, walking slightly differently than she'd walked in. The completed intelligence package went to Whitmore at hour 74. It was 47 pages. It included the full network map, the proxy structure, the personnel identification, the procedural gap analysis, and the revised risk model for the Eastern Sector, and 3 specific operational recommendations that Sophia had built from the ground up using the complete picture they'd assembled. The third recommendation was the most significant. It identified a specific window, a 6-day period 3 weeks before the deployment, during which the network would be at its most operationally visible due to the 4-day command and control update cycle. If the coalition moved a specific action during that window, it would interrupt the update cycle at the moment of maximum network exposure and create a disruption that would degrade the network's effectiveness for the critical first weeks of the deployment. The timing was precise. The logic was airtight. The risk was real, but bounded and clearly documented. Whitmore called her directly when he finished reading. Page 39, he said. Yes. The action window. You're recommending we move during a period when the network knows the deployment is 6 weeks out. 3 weeks out at the time of the action, she said. The network will be consolidating its collection posture because it expects us to be in final deployment preparation. It won't be looking for an action, it will be looking for data. And we give it an action instead. We give it something it can't ignore and isn't positioned to counter, she said. And we use the disruption to rewrite its risk model for the first deployment weeks. He was quiet for a moment. Who executes the action? She had known this question was coming. The team that's been working this for 74 hours, she said. We know the network better than anyone. We go in with the disruption package. We have the window. We have the picture. You specifically. Yes. Whitmore was silent for 5 seconds. In a career that had required her to count silences accurately, Sophia knew that 5 seconds was the length of a silence in which a person who cares about someone is calculating the cost of saying yes against the cost of saying no. The action profile, he said finally, keeps you inside the network zone for how long? 14 hours, she said. Maximum. More likely 10. And your exit? 3 routes, 2 primaries, 1 contingency. All documented on page 43. Another silence. Shorter this time. Approved, he said. You have your window. She looked at Reyes across the room. He had been listening to her side of the call. He read her expression. When? He said. 18 days, she said. He nodded once. I'll tell the team. She put the phone down and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of having made a decision that has weight, and having made it clearly without flinching, because flinching was not available when the weight was this real, and the people depending on the decision were this specific. 368 soldiers. She knew some of their names now. She had memorized the deployment roster the night before leaving Fort Dawson, not because she was required to, but because she was the kind of person who needed the weight she was carrying to have specific faces and names attached to it. Abstraction was the enemy of proper judgment. The moment you stopped thinking about people as people and started thinking about them as variables in a model, you started making the kind of error that she had spent years learning to identify in other analysts, and then one specific night in the previous operational cycle had made herself. Specialist Derek Huang, third row, who had stood in a corridor at 0615 and said, "I'm going to carry this." Sergeant Marcus Cole, who had been taken to the ground and gotten up and asked the right question. Lieutenant Christine Park, who was running the corrected model from the Fort Dawson end, and who had walked into Sophia's office without being invited because she had something to say. Colonel Adrian Mitchell, who had stood in front of a full formation and said I was wrong and meant every word and would command these people into an eastern sector that was now significantly better understood than it had been 4 days ago. All of them moving toward something. All of them dependent in ways they knew and in ways they didn't on the completeness of the picture. She was going to make the picture complete. The action executed on day 18. It went in at 0300 and was complete by 11:30, 8 hours and 47 minutes inside the 14-hour window Sophia had projected. Reyes coordinated the communications. Okonkwo ran the real-time network monitoring from the forward base, tracking the disruption pattern as it propagated through the proxy structure and confirming that the impact was hitting the nodes they'd identified rather than adjacent civilian infrastructure. Sophia led the disruption package deployment herself. She did not do it because she was the only person who could have executed the technical components. Reyes's team was capable of the mechanics. She did it because the decision-making in the field required reading the network's response in real time and adjusting the deployment sequence based on what the response revealed, and that kind of reading required the complete picture that only she currently held in its entirety. She did it because there are things that require you personally to be in the room where they happen, and this was one of them. At 0847, the network made a move she hadn't fully anticipated. Not a catastrophic surprise. Not a failure of analysis. The kind of response that a sophisticated actor makes when they realize the disruption is hitting something they care about. A rapid rerouting of the command and control signal through a backup channel that they'd kept dark and unused precisely for a moment like this one. She saw it happen in the real-time data. She adjusted, not in seconds. In the fraction of a second that follows the full understanding of what you're looking at when you're training and your experience, and every decision you've ever made in a situation like this converges into a single clear directive. She redirected 2 elements of the disruption package to the backup channel. The rerouting failed. The network's command and control update cycle was interrupted. The window closed exactly as projected. At 1131, from inside a vehicle, moving at speed away from the network zone, she sent a single encrypted message to Whitmore. It said, "Package delivered. Window confirmed. Exiting clean." His response came back in 4 minutes. It said, "Well done. Come home." 3 weeks later, the Fort Dawson deployment moved into the eastern sector. Christine Park ran the intelligence support from the analytical end with a precision that Sophia had expected, and that exceeded even that expectation in 2 specific moments, when Christine caught secondary network signals that neither she nor Reyes had flagged and incorporated them into the real-time picture before they could become operational surprises. Mitchell commanded his soldiers with the full corrected picture in his hands, and made decisions that repeatedly demonstrated what happens when a capable combat commander operates with complete information instead of assumptions. He moved his people through the eastern sector with a clarity of understanding that protected them in the places where they would have been exposed under the original model. Every soldier on the deployment came home, not without cost. There were injuries. There were close moments. There were decisions that the people who made them would carry for years. War does not offer clean passages. It offers only the possibility of preparation and what you do with the preparation you have. But every soldier came home. Sophia was back at the forward base when she got the confirmation. Reyes handed her the message from Whitmore. She read it once, set it down, picked up the cold coffee that had been on the edge of her workspace for 2 hours and drank it without noticing it was cold. "All of them," Reyes said. "All of them," she confirmed. He sat down across from her. "I've been in this work for 9 years," he said. "I have never seen an intelligence package come together the way this one did. The offset identification, the proxy structure, the action window, the whole picture in the timeline we had." She looked at her hands. "Okonkwo found the offset," she said. "Without that thread, I'm still building the wrong model." "Okonkwo found it because she wouldn't stop looking," he said. "Because someone had told her that the thing she was seeing was real, even when the formal system was telling her it wasn't." Sophia looked at him. "Did I tell her that?" "Not in so many words," he said. "But she told me the morning after you talked to her that it was the first time someone with your background had looked at her work and responded to it as if it meant exactly as much as she believed it meant." The room was quiet. "She's going to be exceptional," Sophia said. "I know," he said. "I think she already is." 6 weeks after the deployment completed, Sophia Reynolds walked back through the gate at Fort Dawson. She had not announced her return. Whitmore's office had processed the reassignment paperwork efficiently and without fanfare, and the specifics of where she had been and what she had done remained classified at a level above everything that would ever appear in any standard personnel communication. What was not classified was that she was back. Corporal Amara Jennings was crossing the main corridor when she saw her and stopped walking entirely. Sophia saw her and nodded. Jennings said, "You came back." "I said I would." Jennings looked at her for a moment. Then she straightened to something that wasn't quite a formal salute, but was in the same family. The instinctive response of a person who is in the presence of someone they have reorganized their understanding of. "The deployment," she said. "All of them came home." "Yes." "People are saying it's because the intelligence picture was different, that the Eastern Sector risk model changed. Threat models update regularly," Sophia said. "It's part of the process." Jennings looked at her. She understood clearly that the answer she had just been given was the official version. She also clearly understood something about the gap between the official version and the complete version, and she had the wisdom to accept that gap as something she was not going to close through this particular conversation. "Welcome back, Captain," she said. "Thank you, Corporal." Mitchell was in his office when Voss told him Sophia had returned. He stood up from his desk, a thing he rarely did when receiving routine personnel information, and stood there for a moment before sitting back down. Then he stood up again and walked to his door and opened it. He walked down the corridor to her office. Her door was open. She was at her desk. There was a new stack of files beside her. Her coffee was fresh. She looked exactly as she had looked 18 months ago when she first arrived at Fort Dawson, quiet, contained, present, and completely different. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. "Sir?" "Reynolds." He looked at her. "All of them came home." "Yes, sir. I want you to know the Eastern Sector corrections. The way my people moved through that zone. I saw it in real time. I saw exactly where we would have been without the corrected picture." She said nothing. "I've been in command of soldiers for 23 years, he said. "I have never been more grateful for an analyst's work than I was in those 3 weeks." She looked at him. "You made good decisions with the picture you had," she said. "That's on you, not me. The picture was yours." "The decisions were yours," she said. "Don't give away the credit for those." He was quiet. "I've changed the evaluation protocol," he said. "For the entire unit. Full personnel file review before any assessment. Complete information requirement before any public performance evaluation. I'm putting it into the standard operating procedure." She looked at him. "That will save someone from what happened to you 2 months ago," she said. "And from what happened to me." "Yes," he said. That's the idea. She held his gaze. Then it was worth it, she said. He stood in her doorway for a moment longer. Welcome back, Captain, he said. It's good to be back, sir, she said, and she meant it. Not because Fort Dawson was simple or easy, or because the particular challenges of this posting had become comfortable, but because the work here was real, and the people here were real, and she understood now in a way that she hadn't fully understood when she arrived 18 months ago, that the value of a place was not only in the obvious moments, the field exercises and the command briefings and the classified operations that would never appear in public records. The value was also in the corridors. In the conversations that happened when one person told another the truth about what they were seeing and what they believed and what they were not going to stop looking at, even when the formal structure told them it was within acceptable variance. The value was in what changed when people stopped operating on incomplete pictures of each other. She picked up the first file in the new stack. She opened it. She started reading. Outside her window, somewhere on the base, a formation was running drills. She could hear the cadence, that rhythm she had been hearing for 20 months now, the sound of people moving together toward something. It was the same sound it had always been, but she heard it differently now, because she knew what it cost to protect it, and she had decided with full information and clear eyes, and the specific freedom of a person who has chosen her weight rather than having it assigned to her, that the cost was one she was willing to keep paying. Captain Sophia Reynolds, who had been told she didn't belong, who had been pushed to the center of a field and invited to prove her insignificance in front of everyone, had done something much simpler and much harder than proving them wrong. She had kept doing the work that mattered, and the people who